You know, we've all heard of these epic, long wars. The 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War. But what if I told you there was one conflict that just blows them all out of the water? A struggle that spanned nearly 8 centuries and literally reshaped the world we live in today.
Yeah, you heard that right. 781 years. I mean, just try to wrap your head around that. That's more than 30 generations of people, all born, living their entire lives, and dying under the shadow of a single massive war. It's a conflict that would come to define an entire nation. So how on earth does a war like that even start? And how does it finally, dramatically end? Well, that is exactly the story we're going to dive into today. How a lightning-fast invasion kicked off centuries of fighting, and how its conclusion launched a brand new age of global conquest. All right, let's get into it. Our story starts way back in 711 AD. Europe is still kind of a mess after the fall of Rome, and the Iberian Peninsula, what we now call Spain and Portugal, is sitting at a major crossroads.
So on one side of the water, you've got the Christian Visigothic Kingdom. Now on paper, it looks pretty good. It's big, it's rich, but in reality, it's super fragile, constantly being torn apart by nobles fighting each other for power. Then you look across the strait and you see the Islamic Umayyad Caliphate. And this isn't just some local kingdom, this is a global superpower, stretching all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to Persia. The stage was set for a collision of titans.
And collide they did. In 711, a Berber general named Tariq bin Ziyad crosses into Iberia with what sounds like a tiny army, just 7,000 men. He meets the massive Visigothic army, and incredibly, he crushes them. Turns out some Visigothic nobles actually betrayed their own king right there on the battlefield. After that, the whole kingdom just fell apart like a house of cards. The result? In just 7 years, pretty much the entire peninsula was conquered and got a new name, Al-Andalus.
With Iberia secured, the Umayyad momentum just seemed unstoppable. Their armies pushed north, right over the Pyrenees Mountains and into modern-day France. For a second there, it really looked like all of Europe was next on the menu. But even as this massive empire was expanding, a tiny, almost insignificant pocket of resistance was holding on for dear life.
In the year 732, that Umayyad advance slammed into a literal wall of Frankish steel. At the Battle of Tours, a commander named Charles Martel, who would go down in history as the Hammer, had his infantry form this incredibly disciplined, dense shield wall. Wave after wave of cavalry charged, crashed against it, and just broke. The Umayyad commander was killed, the army retreated, and the invasion of the rest of Europe was stopped cold. And this created such a wild contrast. You have these two completely different worlds on the same piece of land. Down in the south, Al-Andalus was thriving. It was a beacon of culture and science, with libraries that made anything in the rest of Europe look tiny. Meanwhile, way up in the northern mountains, you had this little flicker of resistance, the Kingdom of Asturias, basically a rugged hideout for ex-soldiers and stubborn farmers. The leader of this little band of holdouts was a Visigothic noble named Pelayo. At the Battle of Covadonga, he and just a few hundred followers ambushed a Muslim force in a super narrow mountain pass. Now, in military terms, it was a tiny skirmish, but symbolically, oh, it was huge. It was the first Christian victory, and it created this powerful legend that God hadn't abandoned them. This tiny cave kingdom became the seed from which the entire Reconquista would grow.
So as these tiny Christian kingdoms are slowly growing in the north, Al-Andalus down south enters its own spectacular golden age, a period of incredible wealth and learning that, ironically, was already sowing the seeds of its own destruction.
In 929, the ruler Abd al-Rahman III declares himself caliph, making his capital, Córdoba, the center of an empire that could rival any on earth. Seriously, it was Europe's most advanced society, a hotspot for science, philosophy, and art. And its power was built on keeping this really delicate unity between Arab elites, Berber soldiers, and locals who had converted.
But that unity, it just couldn't last forever. In 1009, a vicious civil war explodes. The central government in Córdoba collapses, and the Golden Age comes to a very violent end.
And what replaced it? Al-Andalus completely shattered into dozens of small rival city-states known as typhos. So all of a sudden, the Christians' single powerful enemy was gone. In his place were more than 20 smaller kingdoms, all busy fighting each other. For the kingdoms in the north, this was the moment. This was the opportunity they'd been praying for.
And this, right here, is the fundamental shift in the whole story. The Christian kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, and Navarre begin this relentless push south. The tide of the war was finally turning, and this time, it was for good.
So after a few more centuries of this grinding warfare, it all comes to a head in the year 1212. In a super rare moment of unity, the big Christian kingdoms actually put aside their differences and joined forces to face the massive Almohad army that had come up from North Africa.
This was it, the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa. Both sides saw this as the ultimate showdown, the decisive battle for the entire peninsula. This was for all the marbles.
The Christian coalition absolutely shattered the Almohad forces. It was a catastrophic, crippling defeat for the Muslim Empire. This was the point of no return. This was the moment Al-Andalus truly began to fall apart for good. After that decisive victory, the Christian advance was just unstoppable. The great cities of Al-Andalus, Córdoba, Seville, Valencia, they all fell one by one, and soon only a single glittering jewel remained, the Kingdom of Granada.
Now, Granada was clever. It managed to survive for another 200 years, mostly through smart diplomacy.
But its time finally ran out when the marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile united Spain into a single superstate. In 1482, they launched a final 10-year war. Fortress by fortress, they just closed the noose, until on January 2, 1492, the last Muslim ruler of Granada handed over the keys to the city.
So, after 781 years, the war was over. Finally. But this ending was also an explosive new beginning, one that was about to change the entire planet. Think about that. In the exact same year, the war finally ends, the victorious Spanish monarchs suddenly have the money, the ambition, and a battle-hardened culture of conquest just itching for a new project. So they agree to fund the wild voyage of an Italian sailor named Christopher Columbus. The end of one epic conflict directly enabled the start of a whole new one.
The same fire that had burned across Iberia for nearly 8 centuries was about to be carried across the Atlantic. The Reconquista was over, but the Age of Conquerors? Well, that had just begun.